and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now, this is, of course, where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues, and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndora, and this is what's coming up on the show today. Now, as the deadly coronavirus, COVID-19, continues to spread across South Africa and around the world, today we take a look at how the COVID-19 will impact the media industry. In our international editor feature this week, we go to Zambia and Lusaka to get a view and an update on how the media is telling the COVID-19 story. We'll also hear from our correspondents in Nigeria, Zimbabwe and New York about the challenges in reporting this story. In our News in History feature this week, we take you back to 1998, and that's when a former US president came to South Africa on an official visit. Can you remember which president it was? Find out a little bit later in the show. So that is the program for today, and don't forget you can always engage with us on social media using the Twitter handle #SABC Media Monitor. Now, before we go into our highlighted stories on the program, let's first take a look at what's on the front pages of your Sunday newspapers this morning. And we start with the Sunday Times. And that headline says, the war we have to win. The story details how midnight on Thursday marked a decisive moment for South Africa as the lockdown announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa to fight the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. The City Press, let's take a look at that. Well, this morning, this leads with a story about how the lockdown imposed due to the COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak has taken a massive knock on the economy as the credit rating agency Moody's investors have downgraded the economy into junk status. And the Sunday Tribune has hits retirement home is what the Sunday Tribune is leading with this morning. The story highlights how two elderly Durban women from a retirement village have tested positive for the COVID-19 and are currently fighting for their lives. And the Weekend Argus on Sunday is reporting on how authorities are battling to contain COVID-19, which this past week claimed its first 2 lives in Cape Town has gone past the 1,000-mark infection rate. According to the publication, the virus is putting pressure on the critical medical resources, supplies and equipment. All right, so those are your newspapers. We'll look at them a bit more detail later on with our guest editor. But first, let's catch you up with what's captured your attention on the social media platform Twitter. And a short while ago, these were the top trends in South Africa. And I suppose no surprise in guessing that day 3 is the one that's leading the pack. And Nsiki, always controversial, although this time she's half-half with the people, and she basically had an open letter to the president and highlighting some of the challenges that poor people facing. But day 3 is the one that really captured my attention, and I'm sure all of you are busy coping with that. And this is where we started to see some of your tweets coming through. All right, so some people are having fun, of course. The first one here, don't forget to sanitize your food. It's got all his food in a bathtub. And then the next one, Rami Chwene basically saying it's day 3, even in the midst of turmoil and confusion, may you find your rest and peace. Let's continue to be still so we can flatten the curve. And famous actress, of course, there sending her messages through. And a lot of people are now finding themselves doing a lot of things like counting small things. This guy says there's 875 bricks on my stoop. He had lots of time to count those. And then day 2, I never knew Mari biscuits had 21 holes in each biscuit, and a full packet has 27 biscuits. And this one now, it says, I'm proud to be South African, and you can see people there doing their social distancing with their shopping. And this one says, this strip contains 51 staples. This is going into a stapler, of course. Again, people finding things to do to count. And this one fascinates me as well, because this talks about a film which was produced in 2018, I believe. And episode 10 of this series talks about a deadly coronavirus that had been manipulated and was made more stronger than SARS and MERS. I don't know. Some people are saying it's a conspiracy theory. I don't know. But this was a TV series in South Korea, and conspiracy theories are running with it. All right, now, today is day 3 of the national lockdown in South Africa, and it seems that all areas of life and work have already been impacted by the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, is warning that the virus poses the biggest danger to the world economy since the 2008 financial crisis. Well, we've already seen tourism and aviation and other services like eventing and conferencing crashing here at home. So what about the media? What lies ahead for this sector? Well, Chris Botha, the Group MD at Park Advertising, wrote an article for Daily Maverick recently, and he believes that the outlook is pretty bleak. He joins us now via Skype. Chris, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Peter.
Okay, so you wrote this article, you thought about it, and give us a sense of what you think is going to happen, likely to happen, and in which areas in the media.
I think the first area which is the most fundamental issue that we are going to see an impact on media is in the actual revenue that the media owners make. Let's be real about it. Every media owner in South Africa really makes a large majority of the money that they use to fund themselves from advertising. As we're seeing this lockdown where we're seeing businesses, restaurants closing down, we're going to see all of those businesses and restaurants stop advertising because they realize that in reality, if their doors aren't open, why advertise? As advertising gets pulled back, that means that the money being put into these media owners are going to have a fundamental impact. And you're going to see a lot of media owners going to really struggle to make their budgets, and all of those media owners, remember, that's the money that goes towards funding, paying journalists, paying cameramen, paying newspaper printers, paying the cinema reel guy, So the business impact is the first fundamental impact, after which there's a plethora of other impacts as well.
And might we see job losses? It seems as if it starts with the guy who's actually got a business that needs to advertise. He goes to an ad agency, and all of this now is a chain reaction all the way down, and we'll see job losses everywhere. Is that likely?
Exactly right. Yeah, highly likely. Look, remember, there's a large number of agencies as well that run, and basically their business is built around doing things like activations.
Yeah.
And now those activations agencies literally for a month, at least a month, will not have any business coming in, right? And so it's definitely going to have a knock-on effect on jobs. And I think people tend to think that the advertising and marketing industry is separate from the South African economy. It's not. It's highly and directly linked. As we see the South African economy struggle, very often the very, very sharp tip that gets touched very first is the advertising and marketing industry. So yes, we'll definitely see job losses.
All right. So what about us now being contained in homes? What does that mean for things that we normally interact with outside?
Look, I think it's a variety of impacts. I think, first of all, if you go look at media types that will get negatively impacted, I think obviously media type like cinema. I think obviously now people can't go to movies anymore, and we've seen a large number of movies actually postpone their launches. The new Bond movie, as an example, was supposed to launch in April, has been moved out to November. Mulan, the new cartoon kids movie that was supposed to launch now during the kids' holiday, has also been moved out. So so from a cinema perspective, we've seen quite a big impact there. I think then the other interesting thing for me is electronic media like television and radio. We saw, I loved some of the tweets that you showed a little bit earlier on, and immediately, I think I saw somebody tweet the other day that said, "Can somebody bring out Netflix 2? Because I've watched all of Netflix 1, right?" So I think that's the reality, is that more and more people are watching television.
Yeah.
Daytime television is doing incredibly well. We saw even with one of the first days before lockdown, daytime television ratings double.
Wow.
Right. So that's double the amount of people now watching daytime television. And that was before lockdown. So I think it's more about, it's not that people watch different media types, it's that they watch it in a different way.
Right.
We're seeing more viewing of entertainment type programming. I think maybe that distraction, getting away from news. People still watching a lot of news, especially with the presidential announcements. And that I think just a move away from how we watch television, from not just watching prime time at night towards watching a lot more daytime television and radio and listening to radio as well.
Well, talking about radio, there was the drive time shows in the morning and in the evening. That's certainly going to take a different slant, and that's usually the busiest time for commercials. And this is where these radio stations make their most money.
Absolutely. So what we've seen a lot of the radio stations do is they've even adjusted their on-air presenters. So as an example, we saw a station in Johannesburg change their drive time that's normally from 6 to 9 in the morning. They changed it from 7 to 10. So that their primetime presenter now broadcasts from 7 to 10 in the morning, right? So I think that agility, I think, is something that I'm looking at with great interest at the moment, to see how media owners are adjusting themselves and trying to remain agile. And I think also the type of content that people are using and listening to more, like I say, more entertainment, but still with a strong news base to it. So the radio guys are adjusting from a platform perspective. Yeah. The problem, as I mentioned at the beginning, was that if the whole advertising industry is struggling, there's less money coming into the industry. So their share will struggle as much as television, print, any other media type will.
All right. So there's always two sides to a story. So I guess, and I saw at the newspaper stands this morning, some papers didn't even come out. People are not able to leave the house, so print is probably going to suffer a little bit because people just won't go out. But then I suppose we on front of our computers and clicking more.
Absolutely. Print's taking an absolute beating at the moment. Look, print's been on life support for the past 10 years since the internet and content has really blown up. I think now this is just an absolute brutal blow for it, because remember, any media type is habit forming. If you watch a media type or consume a media type for a certain period of time, it becomes part of your habit. There's very, very few people who still read newspapers and magazines. Those people, a lot of those are now not going to be able to read it for that exact reason that you've just mentioned. So they're falling out of the habit of reading newspapers and magazines, and therefore that will have a very negative impact on print. I think from the positive side, I think platforms like Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, all of those sort of digital platforms, I think, are all growing, and I think people will become in the habit form again of being able to see themselves using a lot of those platforms for the news instead of necessarily using newspapers and magazines.
All right, so I'm scared to say this, but I suspect things like online gaming and gaming generally is going to blow up.
Yeah, it's massive. I think it's a way to remain anti-socially social or socially antisocial, whichever way you want to look at it, right? So in a way you can stay in contact with people and still talk to people and have close interaction without having to lose that, without having to get close to the person in physical contact. So gaming, I mean, we've even seen, we use a lot of the platforms like Blue Jeans and Zoom and Skype. We're using this for Skype right now. I think you're going to see a growth in that a lot. I mean, yeah. Facebook, Twitter also. How can you be socially antisocial, right? Stay away from people physically, but still interact with them. We're seeing a big growth in those platforms as well.
All right. I just wonder, sports advertising, you can't watch a sporting event without advertising. With no sporting events, that must be billions literally lost in terms of revenues.
Yeah, look, and this year we had, think about it from a sponsorship perspective. Yeah. So if you had English Premier League, which is one of the biggest sponsorship properties in South Africa, and of course you had Liverpool doing really well, so I can imagine that there's a whole lot of people watching more football because Liverpool is doing well. Now there's no more football. There's no more rugby. There's no more cricket. We had the IPL that was due to start now, which from a cricket perspective, and you have to go look at it back from a business perspective, right? So the business of cricket is funded for a large part, as an example, by the BCCI, which is the Board of Cricket in India. And a lot of their funding comes from the IPL. So yeah. Cricket as an overall sport will get impacted by this. Then we have the Olympics, right? There are very many brands that have already invested billions of dollars in the Olympics. And I saw recently the Prime Minister of Japan announce that they are going to postpone the Olympics. How far they're going to push it out? Is it going to get cancelled eventually? I mean, that is billions and billions and billions of dollars that marketers would have spent and lost, right? So I think there's a very real reality that sports sponsorships in the long run will take a big knock. And again, it's habit forming, remember?
Yeah.
Advertising spend the same way as habit forming. If brands are normally in the business of spending billions of dollars and rands on sponsorships, it gets postponed one, they might get skittish and decide not to do this again.
All right, so now I know that as MD of Park Advertising, you spend a lot of time with clients, helping them with strategies and so on and so forth. I just wonder if the nature of advertising is going to change during a pandemic. You can't be having, or can you be having, happy adverts? Maybe you want to cheer people up, but there's always the other side of this, that we're in the midst of a very serious crisis. So how do you start? You've got to change your messaging, I'm sure, but what do you do?
Yeah, messaging is critical, right? And I was interested to see how many brands have not had that agility, where we've seen a large number of brands who still advertise sharing, as an example, which is a big thing, right? And I understand that it's not always very easy to change, but I think that, going back to my earlier point about adaptability, I think is critical. Travel and packages, there's still so many people who offer travel packages, and I think having that agility to change very quickly, I think, is important. And again, this is where I think digital media will start playing an important role. Just for the layman, if you shoot a television commercial, before the television commercial, before it flights on air, invariably the concept gets decided 3-4 months beforehand. It gets filmed and shot. Then it gets produced and given to the television station. So by the time it is on air, it's a 3-4 month old product, right? So I think very often digital media is far more adaptable and far more quick turnaround. Yeah. So in terms of changing copy very quickly. So I think, again, this plays into the hands of digital media, where we are going to see a lot of platforms that allow advertisers the opportunity to change their messaging literally on an hour-by-hour basis. I think will start playing into their hands, and the long lead media, which is what we call them, like print, outdoor, and traditional television advertising, I think will again start taking a beating, with people not knowing exactly what the messaging around Corona has literally changed on a week by week basis. I think a couple of weeks ago we were all sending gifts and memes to each other that we think this is the funniest thing ever, and now we're seeing that people are dying and it's actually really, really bad. I think, again, that quick turnaround messaging is going to become more important, the agility for marketers to respond far quicker.
And I suppose, hard sell is one thing, buy this product, but then there's this other type of marketing, often is just about branding and awareness. And I see a number of people now trying to get into the coronavirus story. And it is a dangerous thing where you're trying to build your brand in the midst of a pandemic and something that's killing people. How do you advise clients to tread carefully during this kind of thing? Do you jump in or do you stay back?
Look, that's a very tricky question to answer. I think if you go back to cancelling of advertising, which we're seeing a lot of brands do at the moment, right? The reality is that life will carry on and business will carry on. And during this time, if all your competitors are cutting off their advertising and you continue to advertise, look, there's an opportunity for you to gain market share. There's an opportunity for you to gain share of mind. While at the same time, I think it's about being culturally sensitive. I think and I loved what the president spoke about, brands and companies that try and profiteer at this time, which I think is exactly the right sentiment. I think it's about a lot of brands at the moment are cutting advertising, saying, listen, it's the right thing to do for us to stay away from trying to encourage people to leave their home and go to a business, which I think is exactly the right thing to do. I think other brands are saying, listen, how can we help you? I've seen a lot of the online platforms grow, and I think that's, for me, it's about that sensitivity and that adaptability that's critical.
And what I'm finding more and more on my mobile phone is I'm getting messages from all sorts of people now saying, we can help you during coronavirus. And it's starting to become a bit annoying, to be honest, for me personally, because the ones that I've had relationship with over time, I expect to hear from them. Now I'm getting messages from other companies that I didn't know. That also can be a negative.
Of course, and that goes back to that profiteering again. So where were you in 3 or 4 weeks ago? Now all of a sudden you think you're my best friend. I think and that's where I'm not saying we should change what you do. I think you should adapt what you do.
Right.
If you've never targeted a certain consumer before, this is not an opportunity for you to now start targeting certain consumers.
Right.
I think it's about sticking to your messaging. I think but being adaptable at the same time and saying that I was here for you 6 weeks ago. I'm here for you now. I'll still be here for you 6 weeks from now. Otherwise, exactly right. It does come across as opportunism and profiteering of the worst kind in a time where it's not needed at all.
All right. I think you might have answered my last question now a bit before. As we learn new ways of doing things as a result of this pandemic, it may be that we'll never go back to the old ways. So if I can't buy a paper for 3-4 weeks, maybe 6 longer, I may never buy a paper ever again because I've learned to find news somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that for me is the next interesting discussion that we're going to have is, right, what's the medium to long-term impact of this? Is if I don't go to movies anymore, if I don't read the newspaper anymore. I saw a lot of the weekend newspapers now going online, and you can now read the Sunday Times basically for free online today. And similarly so with cinema. Cinema have also adapted themselves, and they've realized that they're becoming a content platform. And maybe the concept of having somebody come into a building and sit in a seat next to 350 other strangers at the end of 2020 will no longer be the done thing. So therefore, but I've no doubt that the cinema houses around the world, cinema content is still great content. Is how do they adapt to that? How do they change their model? How do they change the distribution platforms? And I think that is where everybody is changing. If you go look at what MultiChoice has done over the years, MultiChoice was back in the days was an Mnet decoder. Now, if you go look at what MultiChoice is now, it's with DStv Now and Showmax. They have streaming platforms, right? I think media owners will also have to learn how to be adaptable. Print media owners will have to be adaptable as well, because remember, for every let's use an Afrikaans newspaper like the Beeldburger Volksblad Rapport, those newspapers, remember, fund News 24. News 24 is built on the basis of the money coming in from and the journalists from those Afrikaans newspapers. Similarly, so Times Live, similarly, so IRL. There's a large number of these platforms. So I think a lot of the digital platforms are still built on a print basis. So I'm fascinated to see how in the long term the media owners make that change. And by the way, this is not a South African thing. This is a global thing.
Right.
Across the globe, every media owner is struggling with the same things. So how they adapt and change will be fascinating to see.
Chris Botha, thanks so much indeed for sharing your insights with us. Thanks for your time and stay safe.
Wonderful. Thanks for the opportunity, Peter.
All right. Okay. So that was Chris Botha, MD of Park Advertising, and sharing his thoughts. The media, not just the only industry, of course, being affected, but many of us. And we don't know what's going to be on the other side. But what we do know is a lot of things will never be the same again. We'll have more for you on Media Monitor right after this.
Let us now be mature. And I appeal especially to the political class. Don't divide these people, they don't deserve it.
Why?
Why what?
Why did you throw your name in the hat?
Well, I thought it was necessary to rise to the occasion.
There is a clause in the new legislation that allows for an applicant to go to the minister and get permission to campaign, for instance. Do you think that that is not a right approach?
No, that's totally undemocratic. It gives a lot of power to the Minister of Home Affairs of South Africa. Then he becomes the sheriff.
Individuals will not be allowed to leave their homes except under strictly controlled circumstances. All shops and businesses will be closed, except for pharmacies, laboratories, banks, essential financial payment services. The nationwide lockdown is necessary to fundamentally disrupt the chain of transmission across society. I call on all of us, one and all, to play our part and our role as South Africans.
Hello and welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, reporting the story of the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly not been without its challenges, whether it's here in South Africa, across the continent and even further abroad. Earlier this week, our correspondents in Zimbabwe, Effort Msekiwa in Nigeria, Phil Ihaza and Sherwin Brycebees, who's in New York, spoke to Aldrin Sampear on African perspectives, and they shared with him the challenges of reporting during a global pandemic.
Many journalists are also looking at alternative ways of covering stories, observing precautionary measure, when they go out to, when they have to cover stories. Of course, people are observing social distance, and even more, the awareness is growing by the day. And so if you have to do interviews and all of that, you have to ensure that you have all the necessary precautions on. Like the face masks and the hand gloves and all of that. But then, people are still looking at different angles of telling the story, especially with the efforts and updates from the government on how they're tackling the spread of tackling or containing the spread of the coronavirus. Of course, some updates are coming in from the government, but even government officials have had to change their mode of communication. For example, the NCDC has set up a microsite where it updates periodically on the development in terms of the new cases, recovered cases and all of that. So yes, indeed, we're evolving just as the coronavirus in Nigeria is being contained.
Okay, Phil, so we'll get to the technical stuff just a bit later on, but I want to ask you personally as a journalist as well, and having to interact with some of your sources, and you spoke about having the mask and having the gloves, but do you sometimes fear for your life at all?
Well, of course, the concern for safety is one of the major things that all journalists have, especially that also that has also concerns me, my colleague in Abuja, but the burden of having to tell the stories, the passion also somehow evens out the fear of losing your life, as long as you can observe the necessary precautions. For example, I don't go out without the face mask. I don't go out without my hand gloves. In fact, I have a handy sanitizer always on in my pocket. We also have in our car when we drive. So those precautionary measures are maintained.
Anytime you go outside, if you're touching surfaces or if you're going to grocery stores or anything of the like, the first thing you have to do is get home, wash your hands and take a shower and put those clothes aside. So they're very basic but scientific guidance that one can follow even as a journalist. But look, we are not able to do the work that we were doing before this virus hit us. We are not in our offices, we're not in newsrooms, we're not interacting with our colleagues, and I think this is a completely ball game, and we are continuing day by day to figure out how to do this better as we get more experience with it. For example, once the lockdown was announced in South Africa, we talked to citizens in South Africa on WhatsApp and on social media and said to them, look, send us your videos. We don't want to bring a microphone and stick it in your face to get your reaction, so you're going to have to play your part too. So I think we're going to see a lot of citizen journalism come to the fore, and it's going to be this new paradigm, really, that we all are going to have to come to terms with.
A lot of journalists are actually trying to get information, trying to learn from how some of us have been able to, operate as individuals. Some of us have been able to build stories even at times when you can't get access to certain areas, but you still manage to get information, you still manage to get contacts. So it's a different experience. We might be ahead, but when it comes to the COVID-19, remember, Zimbabwe is behind. So the methods are still being developed. People are still learning. It's still new to everyone.
Well, our correspondents were also asked about how they deal with both misinformation and also reporting scientific information.
We've been dealing with alternative facts and fake news since the presidency of Donald Trump took office in January of 2017. So when it comes to COVID-19, I mean, we don't have to recalibrate and readjust our perspectives and how we react to misinformation out there. We are pretty well versed in what is real and what is not, certainly from my perspective as a journalist. But follow the facts. Always look at news resources that are established. I mean, you know, in South Africa, you would tune into the SABC or ENCA, or you know what the credible news organizations are. Here, it's the New York Times or various cable news channels or NBC. You have to sift through the nonsense out there, and I think the disinformation out there is not coming from journalists. You know, everybody's a journalist these days. You see politicians to breaking news. You see my mother tweeting all sorts of things. So, follow the journalists, identify who your sources are, and then stick with those. But there's a lot of information out there. And so if you often you can choose to be confused or not. And by following established news sources, I mean, this is an old game that we've been playing. So stick to the facts, follow established news organizations, and you'll be fine.
The Zimbabwean government has been forthcoming with certain information, in as much as they might delay in providing it, but they will, at the end of the day, release the information so that we actually do get the facts and the figures. We actually do get to understand what is happening. But, like what Sherwin just mentioned, that everyone has become a journalist. You have social media where everyone posts reports or stories that are unfounded. Someone just thinks of a story, posts it on social media, and the whole world believes. And we have to go through all the steps of trying to make sure that we verify whether the story is credible, whether there is any truth to that story. So really, it's an interesting time that we are living in, and trying to get the right information out, trying to make sure that we also don't spread either the fear or the misinformation is what we are actually learning to do and keep doing every day and every time, so that people, both in Zimbabwe, people out there in the world, everyone gets to know the real facts and the real stories that are happening on the ground.
All right, Efetum Sekiwa, Phil Ihaza, Sherwin Briceby speaking to Aldrin Sampear during the week about the work of being a journalist during a global pandemic. All right, let's take you back in history now as we go into our news archives and take you back to the 29th of March 1998. Now, former US President Bill Clinton came to South Africa as part of a 12-day African tour. During his South African visit, he had the chance to visit a church in Soweto where he listened to a sermon on the day, and guess what it was about? Adultery. Here's how the SABC covered the story.
As the dust begins to settle after President Clinton's visit, many people are reflecting on what it could mean for South Africa. Kim Clutie looks back on the visit and examines what lies ahead for future relations between the United States and South Africa.
Before 2 o'clock on Thursday morning, President Clinton's jet, Air Force One, touched down, thrusting Cape Town into action. For the next 4 days, the American president's trip brought parts of Johannesburg and Cape Town to a standstill. He showed the common touch, telling people at the Victoria Mtsengi housing project in Philippine Cape Town that he had built houses about 30 years ago.
Yes, was my home.
And he appeared visibly moved during his visit to Robben Island, applauding Mandela for never becoming bitter. He paid tribute to South Africa's youth when he laid a wreath at the Hector Peterson Memorial in Soweto. and spoke about the plight of children when he attended the Regina Mundi Church in Soweto this morning. In Parliament, he spoke of an African renaissance and about breaking down barriers.
And we all have come to believe that our countries will be stronger and our futures will be brighter as we let go of our hatreds and our fears, and as we realize that what we have in common really does matter far more than our differences.
But he's aware that South Africa and the United States don't agree on all issues.
Like all partners, we cannot agree on everything. Sometimes our interests and our views diverge. But that is true even in family partnerships.
The differences became clear during talks between the two presidents. Mandela didn't mince his words. He told a media briefing that he would not abandon countries like Libya and Cuba.
Those South Africans who have berated me for being loyal to our friends, literally they can go and throw themselves into a pool. I am not going to betray the trust of those who helped us.
Another prickly issue was the US-Africa Growth and Opportunity Bill, which is going through the United States Congress.
Sympathetic critics of the bill are saying that there's not enough aid in it, the debt relief is not given enough attention, and there are a whole range of restrictions and conditionalities that would make countries eligible in terms of who gets, in particular, more open trading partnerships.
While supporting the goals of the bill to boost trade and development between African countries and the United States, Mandela voiced his unhappiness about some of the terms.
To us, it is not acceptable. But nevertheless, we accept each other's integrity, and we are discussing that matter in that spirit. Yes, we have taken it up.
But Clinton stood by the bill and was backed up by U.S. Commerce Secretary Bill Daley.
We obviously respect President Mandela's opinion, but we think this is a good piece of legislation that will be helpful in expanding the economic relationship between South Africa and all of Africa if that legislation passes.
As the two presidents headed for Robben Island, many of the other members of the delegation stayed behind to drink wine and talk business with their South African counterparts. The United States is the largest investor in South Africa and one of the country's main trading partners. The private sector and the government are now hoping that President Clinton's visit will have long-lasting effects and that trade and tourism will be significantly boosted. Clinton's visit will soon be backed up by an African trade mission, which could further enhance trade and investment links.
I will be leading a trade mission to Africa later this year, and therein we will bring business leaders back who will look for deals, look for opportunities, look for partnershiping.
Some African countries may also see a glimmer of hope in Clinton's proposition to cancel some African debt. Meanwhile, tourism officials feel that the trip has had a positive impact.
For South Africa, phenomenal. There's no way one could even buy coverage like this. It's absolutely fantastic for us. We're being exposed worldwide to so many different countries, and particularly to America, which is fantastic because we need that growth from America as well. So I think for South Africa, it's just absolutely wonderful. We're delighted from a tourism perspective.
145,000 Americans visited South Africa last year. This was a 20% increase on the previous year. Now they're hoping for many more Americans to travel around South Africa. Already some members of the delegation have said they're coming back.
I look forward to coming back as a mere private person to enjoy this wonderful region.
As talk of the pomp and ceremony begins to fade, many South Africans are hoping that all the words spoken by Clinton and his officials will be translated into action, so that more trade and tourism and better foreign relations will emerge. Kim Clutie, SABC, Cape Town.
All right, so taking us back to 1998, and for some of us who've got grey hair now, we remember those moments like it was just the other day. It's interesting that as much as things have changed, some of the messaging and some of the ceremony still stays the same. We'll be back right after this with more Media Monitor.
A school with a great academic record, a beacon of hope for parents and learners. Now the principal faces charges of sexual grooming and manipulation.
The suspect was arrested by the FCS unit.
We have a reason to believe that the allegations have merit. Our labor section has immediately drafted a letter of suspension.
In the wake of the coronavirus outbreak in the country, mass gatherings such as church services, weddings and funerals have been restricted.
Restrictions have been made. Now it's up to the people to actually observe those regulations.
So you have heard of the term social distancing. What does it mean and how do you practice it in your everyday life?
One thing we've realized and have seen was a sharp increase in takeaway orders, as well as the Uber Eats.
Social distancing doesn't mean that you've gotten off from work, but you can go for golf and you can go to a party or you can go to a restaurant. Social distancing means that you distance yourself socially unless it's absolutely necessary.
The police and in the support of the SNDF were ready to make sure that these things we talk about of complete non-movement will be implemented and will be implemented accordingly.
You are called upon to go out and support our police, work with them, walk amongst our people. This is not a moment for scop and donor, but make sure that when they see you, they see kindness.
The lockdown, which is officially underway, you're seeing visuals of arrests after the lockdown. And these are not the first arrests. 2 arrests were made in KwaZulu-Natal.
Mr. Smith, can you tell us what happened now? The gentleman has been arrested.
If you can't give the police the demonstrable proof or evidence, that is what is going to happen, and that is what must happen. We had our first 2 fatalities this morning. This is not a joke. It's not a game.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now we're talking about the challenges of reporting and telling the story of COVID-19. Well, some of our reporters have been out there on the streets and trying to catch up with this story, and it seems that failure to stick to social distancing seems to be an issue was an issue on day one as South Africans grappled with stopping the spread of COVID-19. SABC, as a public broadcaster, has its reporters covering this pandemic countrywide, but how do they take care of themselves and what precautions are they taking? Taviso Sutole was out on the street with Thabo Madilola.
Now, as media practitioners who are trying to tell the story for you at home on how we're covering the COVID-19 virus and the spread of it at home, this is how some of us, in fact the journalists from the SABC, go out and do the story. It's the vehicle, we travel in pairs most of the time, and we do try and take every precaution as to how not to spread it, firstly, to our colleagues if we do have it ourselves, and secondly, just take further steps, simple steps, to try and prevent it. We always have some sanitizer. The officers made sure that we do have sanitizer amongst us because, as we've heard over the past couple of days, the more you sanitize to try and keep your hands clean, the better it may be. The steering wheel, of course, this is what we'll be touching. The gears, of course, is what we'll be touching. So that too, we try and sterilize down. all of this, of course, if you have the equipment to do so, does come in handy, so that you not sure who was using the car before you, so you try and make sure that you don't pick up something, because you've heard that this virus is spread via droplets, and although we're not quite sure how long these droplets stay on particular surfaces, we always try and be careful with that. Now, the gloves are important, again, because of the equipment we carry, the microphones that we give to people when we speak to them. So the company's made sure that we have a set of gloves readily available for us, so that we do take every precaution when we're speaking to you at home or the people on the streets who we speak to. Make sure that we've got all the protection that we need in as far as protecting ourselves, protecting our colleagues. At the end of the day, we too have to go home and protect our family. So we make sure that the car is sterile, hopefully, to the best of our capacity. Now, this is how we put the story together. Let me take you a look. Now, the vehicle, in essence, becomes our office when you're on the road covering stories such as these, because you never know where you're going to end up first and foremost, how long it's going to take you to get back to the office. So what we've done over the years, the SABC's procured equipment that makes us able to be, quite flexible, if we can put it that way. The laptop is ready on standby. In fact, before I touch that, one of the things that we have to do is sanitize the laptop as well, because remember, not only myself are touching this, colleagues, all of us are using equipment to make sure that we're able to take the story from the camera right here. We never leave without our sanitizer and, of course, the wipes to wipe down all the equipment that we touch, in particular because we are interacting with people on the streets, people who are speaking about it for this virus. And for us, the social distancing part does become a bit difficult sometimes. We don't want to do that interview, and that's why we have to try and keep ourselves as safe as possible. Now, after all is done and all the hard work of editing and trying to put the story together, we finally get to replay it, double check it, make sure that what you get at home is a true reflection, first and foremost, of what is happening on the ground. And also, actually, let me just play you and show you exactly how we do it. As we carried on driving through the west end of Johannesburg, we came to one of the supermarkets that is supposed to be an essential service where food is going to be sold for some of the people. And as you can see, these traffic officers, or the police officers behind me, they've been grappling with long queues. It's a day in the life, basically, of a journalist, SABC News journalist anyway, as we try and bring you the story impartial and independent. And right now, I think the call to all South Africans is what we're trying to do as well, and bring you the story of what is happening on the ground. Is, if you can, please do stay at home, and if you do go out, social distancing once again will be the main call as the COVID-19 virus grips the country. And already heard that there have been deaths in South Africa. I'm Tabiso Sitole, alongside cameraman Tabo Madilula on SABC News in Johannesburg. As we continue driving through the...
All right, so that's a behind-the-scenes look at how we're trying to tell the story of COVID-19 during this very serious time of this global pandemic. Now, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, the CPJ, leading Algerian journalist Khalid Drareni was arrested last Friday and has already been charged and found guilty for committing an attack on national unity. The judge did not specify a prison term and said that the journalist must be imprisoned first, and then the authorities would announce how long he would then be held. The CPJ says that Algerian authorities should drop all charges against journalist Drareni and release him from prison immediately. Drareni, a correspondent for a global press freedom group, Reporters Without Borders, RSF, and co-founder of the news website Casbah Tribune, became prominent for his coverage of the protests which shook Algeria for most of last year, eventually forcing President Abdelaziz Bouteflika to resign in April 2019. Now, TV reporter Toli Glodi was run down by police in Likasi in the Democratic Republic of Congo on the 24th of March whilst using a motorcycle taxi to cover compliance with a 2-day lockdown declared in the province by the governor on the evening of the 22nd as a result of 2 suspected coronavirus cases. The DRC reported a total of 48 cases of coronavirus and 2 coronavirus deaths on the 24th of March, when President Felix Tshisekedi declared a national state of emergency and announced a ban on any travel between the rest of the country and the capital Kinshasa, where most of the cases originated. All right, so some of the things that are happening on the continent, journalists are often on the wrong side of the law, sometimes unjustified, and this is why we keep on highlighting some of these stories. Okay, let's come back home now, and let's take a look at this morning's newspaper headlines. And we're now joined via Skype by Wendell Martin, who's a news editor at Weekend Argus. Wendell, thanks very much for joining us. Good to have you on the program again. Slightly different circumstances, of course. We're staying safe, but thanks so much for making time for us. So I know that there's a story about one of your journalists. We'll get to that just now, but I do want to start with what's in the papers. And let's start with yours. What's on the front page of your paper this weekend?
Sure. Well, COVID-19 is the story that is leading most newspapers for the last couple of weeks. And certainly this weekend, the Sunday newspapers have all led with COVID-19 in various cases. Weekend Argus, being a regional newspaper in Cape Town, went with sort of the heart-wrenching elements around the first death here in the Western Cape and indeed the country. Madeleine van Wyck's family told us that she had no history of travel and contracted the disease, which shows that local transmission is on the rise in our country. And we've also looked at some of the issues around South Africans stuck in other countries and foreigners trapped in South Africa in the front page of our newspaper.
Again, we're only on day 3 now, and I guess the challenge for the media now must be what to report and how do you keep this story going other than just reporting new infections and deaths when they come?
Yes, I think a lockdown has various aspects, and over the next bit we'll be looking at different elements of it. So far, on the lighter side of life, we've seen the way people have used technology to socialize with each other and what people are doing within a lockdown. We're also looking within our paper this weekend, we've looked at consumer trends and the way people some chose to panic buy, some turned to online shopping, and what may happen during this lockdown in the way that people obtain their goods for home life. Other aspects of society that are interesting is what is happening to the homeless and people that are still out in the streets. So COVID-19, besides deaths and the climbing death toll, has many legs to it.
All right, and then we were reporting about the challenges of reporting out there. Tell us about what's happened to one of your reporters.
Yes, Weekend Argus photographer Tracy Adams was out in the field, on Friday afternoon. As you know, journalists are counted as an essential service, and our staff that are working during this time collecting information for reports have South African press cards and the relevant permit and the identification, which was the requirement when being stopped during the lockdown period. The reporters saw flames coming from a suburb near her home in Capricorn Park and went to the area to see what was happening and encountered police sort of kicking a person on the floor. She immediately took out her phone to start recording it. And as that happened, a policeman approached her and said that she's not allowed to record and said that only members of the media are allowed to record. She then identified herself as media and tried to show them papers. And the police then confiscated her phone and told her that she could get it at the police station. She proved that she was media, and a senior on the field eventually told the policeman to give the phone back to her, but to make her delete it. She was able to leave the scene without deleting the video and has the phone. And we have since tweeted the video of the policeman approaching her and trying to take her phone away from her on our Twitter page. They also did threaten her with arrest. And as you can see, SANEF has released a statement about this.
All right, okay, so it's certainly challenging times out there, and it looks like some police probably need to be educated about checking on people. All right, Wendell, thanks so much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us, and yes, stay safe.
Thank you, Peter, and to you.
All right. Okay, and that's where we come to the end of today's edition of Media Monitor. Thanks for watching the show. Join us again at the same week, same place, next time for more of the same. Stay safe, everybody. Stay at home. Bye-bye.
Coronavirus spread internationally and has now hit the shores of South Africa. What are the chances that there will be massive spread here at home?
The probability that we will get some local transmission is likely very high.
And if that happens, will the country be ready for that?
In terms of laboratory testing preparedness, we are prepared.
But who's at risk of contracting this illness?
Anyone who's within a very close proximity, and it's generally recognized to be less than a meter, might inhale or breathe in those little droplets that are then expelled by the infected person.
The most important question is, how can we prevent spread of the virus?
Washing hands with soap and water is still the most effective. Hand sanitizers are an option when you can't wash your hands or your hands are not visibly dirty.
Individuals will not be allowed to leave their homes except under strictly controlled circumstances. All shops and businesses will be closed except for pharmacies, laboratories, banks,